Welcome, everybody.
Awesome. We will jump right in. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And we're aiming to be done tonight in between 8 and 8:15, so right around there. If you'd like, feel free to put your name, optional pronouns, and where you're connecting from in the chat. We'll also have an opportunity to introduce ourselves here just in a moment in a breakout room. So we'd like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that this event is being hosted on the occupied traditional lands of the Spokane people who have stewarded this land from time immemorial. Land acknowledgements do not simply exist in the past tense or a historical context, as colonialism is a current ongoing process. And we as PJALs also acknowledge we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. We know it is insufficient to simply acknowledge the land we occupy and need to continue to center the voices, leadership, and solutions of Indigenous peoples in our community and around the world. So Manahu, everyone. My name is Ivy. I am Paiute of the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe and a youth organizer here at PJALs. And I know I've seen many of your faces before, but just as a reminder, the Peace and Justice Action League of Spokane works to engage everyday people to build a just and nonviolent world. That is our mission as an organization. I'm going to drop some values and community agreements in the chat. Feel free to give those a look over. I know we have a lot to go through tonight, so I will not read through all of them. Let me drop these here in meeting. Maybe it won't let me. I'll work on that just a second. So we'll get right into it. In this workshop, we're going to talk about organizing tactics, anatomy of social movements, how to develop action plans, and key steps to mobilize people. It looks like Liz might be working on that. So just as we go, in these times when we can feel so easily overwhelmed by escalating white supremacy violence, attacks on immigrants, communities of color, and the LGBTQ community, and policies that harm our families and communities, it can be really easy to forget that the cure for despair and the weapon against fear is organizing. And so what we'd like to do tonight is remind ourselves that we can come together around our shared values, tap into love for each other and our deep and righteous outrage to win the changes we want. And we must go beyond any particular march, demonstration, or action and think in terms of a campaign, which is this series of organized, planned actions and/or strategies and tactics to build that community power. And a large part of why I love to work at PJALs is this unique community that we have of intergenerational activism, our platform itself. And so what we're going to do is just take 5 quick minutes to see the questions on the screen here. Feel free to answer them in your little group and consider what you'd like to take off of this Zoom platform, especially with this in mind, the intergenerational activism. So there's 2 questions here. What is your experience/involvement with activism, advocacy, or social justice? And what changes do you want to see in the world, in our country, or in our communities? And so those are 2 really big questions, but feel free to get as narrow or broad as you'd like. And with that, those are the questions. I'll pop us into some breakout rooms here. Everyone, I accidentally overlooked this integral part of the evening, so we'll take a minute for that.
Wanted to introduce myself, everybody. Do we have everybody back? I think so.
Yeah.
So just want to introduce myself briefly. I'm Liz Moore. I'm the director of the Peace and Justice Action League. So I have the honor and privilege of being part of our PJALs community, but also getting to work with Ivy and Adrian and Sarah and Shar. So just wanted to say hello and welcome, and turn it over to Adrian for a quick, short introduction for him too.
Next slide.
Hi, everybody. My name is Adrian Murillo. I'm, as Liz said, organizer for PJALs, and I'm glad to see everybody here, and I hope that we can get some really good ideas and actions going.
Brilliant. So I just had a quick question. I know that may have gotten a little bit personal, so if you had any thing you'd like to share, feel free. Just maybe it's a little bit about what your group talked about, or if there was anything that struck you as unique or provided a little bit more perspective for your evening. I think that's our big vocab word for the night. what we're going to focus on, just perspective. And if not, that's okay too. We can jump right in.
Well, I could share from my pair. I got to talk to Laurel, and we were discussing kind of our excitement and shared interest about thinking about the role of the arts and artists in social justice work, and just talked about like some just excitement, not anything specific yet, but just excitement about ways that we could get specific about that.
Super cool. All right, let's get into it. So we're going to talk just very simply about what is organizing. And I think I'm trying to, hopefully we can make this a little bit more collaborative tonight, because I think this collective vision that we have through all of these perspectives in the room tonight is often way more powerful than anything we can just read about or envision as a theory. And of course, it's going to look totally different. And so what is organizing? Social justice organizing is rooted in this collective process for political education, critical analysis, consciousness raising, reflecting, envisioning, goal setting, planning, any of these things. So organizing on any level has everything to do with power and shifting these relationships of power. And it really is the ability to control our circumstances that make things happen outside of ourselves. So social movements are purposefully organized groups striving to work toward a common goal. These groups might be attempting to create change or to resist change or to provide that, like I said, political voice to those otherwise disenfranchised. Social movements create that social change, and the organizer perspective looks at the big picture of that, focusing on the ways that all aspects of society are integral to the continued viability of our whole community. And so an organizer might focus on why social movements develop, why they continue to exist, and like what social purposes they serve potentially. And on one hand, social movements emerge when there is a dysfunction in the relationship between systems. The union movement developed in the 19th century, for example, in response to the economy change was a great example of this. But also there are many other factors for why people get engaged. And I think we'll talk about that in a moment. So just in your head, if you could think of any other social movements and whose goals were met, and what about those goals have changed over time. So just kind of have that in the back of your head as we move forward. So we're going to start in the very beginning with kind of an interactive throwback to high school, if you will. I did this in English yesterday. We're going to do a literature analysis with Liz.
My new podcast, Literature with Liz. This is a poem that I like to start every organizing training with. So I'm going to read it out loud. It's The Low Road by Marge Piercy. What can they do to you? Whatever they want. They can set you up. They can bust you. They can break your fingers. They can burn your brain with electricity, blur you with drugs till you can't walk, can't remember. They can take your child, wall up your lover. They can do anything you can't stop them from doing. How can you stop them? Alone, you can fight. You can refuse. You can take what revenge you can, but they roll over you. But two people fighting back to back can cut through a mob. A snake dancing file can break a cordon. An army can meet an army. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With four, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house, eat pie for dinner with no seconds, and hold a fundraising party. A dozen make a demonstration. 100 fill a hall. 1,000 have solidarity in your own newsletter. 10,000 power in your own paper. 100,000 your own media. 10 million your own country. It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again after they said no. It starts when you say we and you know who you mean. And each day you mean one more. So I would just invite anyone to share what do you see in this poem? What do you hear in this poem? What do you respond to in this poem? if what you respond to, is there something that you respond to that you feel like has to do with organizing? Why would we use this poem to start a workshop around organizing? Invite anybody to unmute and share your response on any of those questions I just asked, or share in the chat if you like.
I love it. I have been organizing for a minute. I come from union organizing, and I'm currently organizing on behalf of the ACLU. And I love the line, it starts when you say we and you know who you mean. Because there's this moment, and it's my favorite moment actually, when you are shepherding people through the process of organizing, and all of a sudden they recognize that they are not alone. And there's kind of this moment, there's like a light that comes on when they recognize there's a network of solidarity, and there are people that they're standing shoulder to shoulder with. And it doesn't necessarily remove all of the fear, but it really ignites purpose. And it's so powerful. It's so powerful. It's my favorite.
Yeah, I love that line too, Zara. And I see in the chat, there's a comment, you're not alone. Yeah. I think that sense of isolation acts like kryptonite. For me, I know for sure when I feel isolated, I just feel like my life force is sapping out of me. So that part of the work of organizing is to facilitate people building relationships with each other around shared problems and also shared values. Because no campaign is going to get us, no single campaign, just like no action accomplishes the goals of the whole campaign, no campaign can accomplish the goals of the whole movement. And so we have to build relationships that keep us going past any single campaign, through and past any single campaign. Anyone else want to share any response to this?
Hi.
Hi, go ahead.
I'm Stacy Sanchez.
The dog is also responding to the poem. That's how good it is.
So anyways, I'm Stacy Sanchez.
Hello.
Hi, how are you doing today?
Good. What's your thought about this poem?
Oh gosh, it's outstanding. It helps people to think positive thoughts. And I know it sounds kind of weird, but in the past I've been abused and sexually abused. So how can I control those things?
Mm,
Mhm.
yeah. Thank you.
It looks
Well,
like Asha might have had a thought as well.
I like the second, I guess, column, how it starts with like what two people can do. I think what I got from it was like it's tiered, and I really struggle with what my role in an organization is and what I'm doing and if I'm doing it right. But I think what it shows
Me too.
right? But there's tiers to it, right? Like we can all be one of 10 million in a country. We can all, but ultimately, like I feel like the tier part is that here's what you can do when it's just two people. Here's what you can do when there's three people. It says that there's something we can do meaningful at any stage, and we don't need more than just one other person to start organizing. And once you find someone else who cares, it's kind of interesting how you find more people who care. And then once you start talking about it, like you attract that. So I do like how it's tiered in that way, where it shows that you're a part of all of that, and that we kind of need each other at all those levels, right? So at some point, even when we're part of the success of a movement, we still need to come back and be with, one other person or two other people or three other people or four other people, because like you said, that relationship building is so important. And so we are really doing the work at all those levels, right? Even if we don't know if we're doing it right.
Right. Yeah, I really appreciate you naming that. Sometimes there are only two of us at a time.
And please
And-
come back in May. We have a workshop just on that exactly.
Yes. Yeah. So we're the workshop topic in May is about campaigns and about how to build them. We're gonna talk tonight again about that. We're gonna touch on what we talked about last time around the role of the organizer, which is an art and a science type role, which is one of the reasons it's so complex. But yeah, Malcolm, I agree. You can't do much without community. And I think I'm just seeing a lot of alignment in Lauren's comment too, that thinking about power and numbers and how whether you're alone or a small group or a large group, always there are options. So we're going to talk a lot more about that tonight. I really appreciate everyone's comments and appreciate everything that everyone is bringing to this conversation, and the reality that, like, you know, you can do something for 30 years and then be like, am I doing this right? So, like, because there's not a magic to organizing, at least not that anyone has cared to share with me yet. So, but there is a science to it and an art, and we are going to share some of that stuff tonight. Yeah. So let's turn it back over to Ivy. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts on the poem.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, and it just makes me so hopeful. I think when we present this kind of topic to youth, it's always awesome because we get to be the learners and the sharers and the teachers. And then when we have a bigger community space, it's we're all teaching each other and sharing all of these amazing strategies and techniques that we know, and you know, moving from theory into praxis into those who live it every day is just inspiring and enlightening. So we'll jump into organizing tactics next. The youth perspective. So I think we all have likely have separate theories about how and why social movements gain traction. And I think through collaboration of my own peers, we've sort of established that this generalization that social movements are generated through a feeling of deprivation or discontent is true, but people might actually join social movements for a variety of reasons that have nothing to do with the cause in some cases. They might want to feel important, or they know someone in the movement they want to support, or they just want to be a part of something, and that is absolutely valid. Successful movements don't overpower these opponents through an overly garnished audience of followers. In most cases, it can really start at this receptive end and move in a 360 direction of thresholds. And so that is one of my beliefs. And in other words, organizing can begin by mobilizing these active allies and core supporters, and then engaging in this 360 direction, those against us, those who are, you know, in the middle, and those who just have no idea, sort of like this radiating from this nucleus of power and passion. And so feel free to raise your virtual hand, or, you know, think about it in your head. Have you ever been motivated to show up for a rally or sign a petition because one of your friends or somebody you know invited you? And would you have been as likely to get involved otherwise? I know my friend Sarah, who also works for Pajalas, got involved because her parents were involved, and now she's one of the best organizers I know. So very much so. This is undoubtedly this fascinating topic that may or may not be a planned model of social recruitment. I think it's planned personally. Maybe some of you don't. If you have any experience with that, feel free to share in the chat. But zooming right through, because I know we have so much more. Community organizing is not merely this process that is good for its own sake of good. Unless the organization wins concrete, measurable benefits for those who participate, it's not going to last long. And the groups that move themselves while holding endless meetings and plod along involving everyone in the discussion doesn't always quite lead to the action or victory, and is sometimes doomed to shrinking. And so people want to see these results. They want to be involved, and they want to see things moving forward. And that's why they got involved in the first place. And so there's a theory, which of course there's always a theory, that says folks join if two things are true. First, they must see a potential for either benefit or harm to themselves if the group is going to succeed or fail. And second, they must see that their personal involvement has an impact on the whole effort itself. And this makes a lot of sense to me when I heard it for the first time. Winning is critical, but if the group's going to win, whether or not I get involved, if my personal involvement is not critical, then why would I not stay at home and watch TV or do homework? And community organizing is not just this neighborhood thing. It's not just a minority thing. It's not just a thing of the civil rights movement. Many, especially those who are uncomfortable with a political or a particular, community organizing effort, because it's confronting them at the time, seek to sometimes label organizing as maybe out of date or out of place. But in a lot of cases, it's so universal and scalable and applicable. And so what are these principles of organizing that continue to call people to action? And I've written these. Liz might disagree, so feel free to step in if you disagree, or any of you, if you'd like to share your own perspective, that is absolutely acceptable. I've nailed them down to 4, but there might be more. First, people are motivated by their own self-interest. And this is important to motivating involvement from the community that's being organized. It's also key to developing effective strategies to pressure the opposing in general into giving up what the community wants, for example. And many people are uncomfortable with self-interest. I mean, they'd rather focus on values, on selfless giving, or on this mutual aid as this highest virtue. And while that may be true and important and idealistic, we might hope that human beings could somehow be changed into angels, or human nature fails that test every time. Effective community organizing can develop this broader sense of self-interest, and this is where that hope comes into picture that we're going to talk about in a little bit. How can we broaden the sense of self-interest? This comes through a process of building up the horizons of the people we organize. It's become more apparent to me that people are taught every day in these little tiny ways that the system is not going to change no matter what they do. And we learn to stand in line and fold our hands, sit down at the school desk, listen to the teacher. We see our politicians betraying promises every day with little regard to the faith of their voters. We see the rich getting richer and the power escape the consequences of wrongdoing. And so in all of these ways, we learn that nothing we will do individually will change the way things are. Out of simple preservation, we begin to lower our horizons and to shrink into a world we define by our own ability to have impact. So just a little seed, maybe write it down, tapping into that anger and frustration. Think about the last time you were in a meeting or a room was, the wrong temperature for you, too hot or too cold. You may have looked around for a door to open, a window to crack, or even the thermostat. And I'll bet that you've found none of these. You've stopped being bothered by the room. You wouldn't have stopped being bothered by the room, even if you didn't find any of them. So what if you were right next to the thermostat, but it was locked? Wouldn't that heat bother you more? And if you knew where the key was or who could turn down the heat, wouldn't you have the temptation to do something because it's becoming almost irresistible? And in the same way, our view of our own self-interest gets shrunk down to the arena in which we believe we can have this impact. Community organizing seeks to teach people through experiences that they can be effective in a larger and larger sphere, not just in their own neighborhood, not their own city, even further on beyond their state and even the nation. And in this process, we redefine our idea of self. Who is us and who is we in this idea of self-interest? The second being community organizing is this dynamic process. It needs to be. We require constant attention and effort. And it is impossible to use community organizing to get to a certain point and stop, or to build a community organization up and then stop reaching out for new folks and taking on new issues. This process of development that we described above, broadening people's views of their own self-interest, is mirrored in this greater idea of endless growth, endless work on our system itself. We see the dynamic aspect in the initial stages of a building of a group in general. At first, some people are going to want to take on these big issues, and some will identify more achievable goals. The organizer will push for a winnable project so that the group can get stronger slowly. And the formula for building this new organization, I'm going to be honest, when I flipped to this slide, I had no idea what I'd written there, but stands for fight, win, fight, lose, and fight harder. And so any group that can pick its issue, and that's sometimes hard, needs to take the process super seriously. What's necessary in the early stages to grow a strong group, although it's simpler and lower risk, could be, a failure and can be addressed quickly and behind the scenes. It is especially important that they can be handled in the same way the big ones would be. So even if the city is going to put up a stop sign on your request, you should still hold a press conference on the street corner and a march to City Hall to demand it, then negotiate with the traffic engineer over which tree it will be posted on. And I know, you say practice makes perfect, but if people in the early stages of a group learn that all it takes is a phone call to get things done, they'll look to the same strategy next time. And so community organizing is this process of teaching people to work together and how to be effective. It's also important not to confuse the movement for change with the values that the movement seeks to represent. Just because you win an election or get your program approved and funded doesn't mean it's time to quite declare victory. And in fact, it's really at this point that you must strengthen these alliances and grow your community and renew all of this commitment to what created change in the first place. I'm going to check here and make sure I don't have a bunch of confused faces before we move on to 3. So we're good to go. Third, it's so important that at an early stage of development of any group, they learn to deal with conflict and confrontation. Some people might see this as manipulation, as tricking people. Obviously, some groups and some organizers are guilty of this. And in the final analysis, though, groups must learn to learn confrontation and negotiation because they'll eventually have to use and deal with both. And many of the problems that confront low income and minority communities can be solved by this coordination and determination, most simply by focusing on the good of the people and on these commonly understood problems. And so the most fundamental problems are deeply rooted in greed and power, like we will talk about in a moment. And there are those who benefit from that status quo. If we are to build organizations that can really have that serious impact, they will eventually have to come up against a situation where there will be winners and losers. It's of course, we talk about widening disparities and how people are moving further and further to the extreme, and the potential losers are not likely to lay down and roll over especially because of this righteousness of a cause. And if the group has never stood strong before, if they've never made a demand before, if they've never really faced that target, they're most likely going to back down when the going gets tough. And if confrontation is not one of the tools in our toolbox, then we're likely going to ignore problems that require that toughness to be addressed. Last, fourth, unless anyone has another to add, is selecting an issue to work on. And we'll talk about this in April in our workshop. Every group has to take into account the fundamental definition of an issue. Clearly defining change is this consistent theme in successful movements. We see it over and over again. Gandhi wanted independence from the British. The civil rights movement wanted specific legislation passed. The color revolutions wanted a change in leadership. There are all these tangible goals that we would need to build strategy around. And a revolution doesn't begin with just a slogan, but with this clear vision of the change you want to see. Although sometimes you do see the slogan, and I think often they might reap the rewards from that. That doesn't mean you need to be rigid, though. You're not trying to impose a vision as an organizer. You're simply sharing it, you're listening, and you're respecting those who maybe don't hold the same views as you. Although that doesn't mean you have to show that. But above all, you are clear and everybody knows where you stand as an organizer and as an organization of a social movement. I already said it, but typically there's this tangled web of problems, whatever it may be, complaints, bad situations, oppressions, injustices, anything of that nature. And an issue is a problem that the community can be organized around. It needs to be immediate and it needs to be specific and realizable. I'm not very good at spelling that word or saying it, so forgive me. But this really is the toughest of all. It's easy to describe the extreme, these global problems beyond the reach of whatever it may be, your organization or your neighborhood. But that's not a good issue, especially not in the early stages. Not to say they can't be tackled, but of course we need to scale our movement from the beginning to end, just like in that poem. Most effective community organizations can point to the victories that any sane person would say were far beyond their reach, though, because it remains true that calculating the odds on winning is an important first step. And the key to this aspect of cutting an issue is calculation. The organizer has to look with a cold, hard, balancing account of all these factors and look at the issue from side to side on whether it's worth starting out. Some issues or some factors, I suppose, start with how can I get to this problem and who's affected by it? How can I reach them? How much does this problem hurt them? How hard are they likely willing to fight? And all these other factors that we move towards to discuss this. So who benefited from the problem is a great example. How does it affect the way things are? All of these factors, and how would the solution we seek change this equation? So in the end, all we can do is step by step, think it out. And the more we've tried to peer ahead, oftentimes the less likely we are to stumble. So kind of alluded to all these facts here. Liz is going to bring us into the power elite model.
Yeah, and I'm just going to add, take the liberty of adding that I think that the question of self-interest, I think all those four, the Ivy principles are great principles. The principle of self-interest, you know, is the difference between charity and justice in some ways, where I think, like, if we think it's not me that's at stake, I'm going to do this for somebody else, that's an act of charity. When we see our mutual self-interest, then we're called into justice. I think, and there's the second principle made me think of a quote from Gandhi, who said, first they ignore us, then they laugh at us, then they fight us, and then we win. So, so right on for those. So the power elite model and organizing theory. Go ahead.
I just want to add something real quick about what Ivy was just saying about conflict and resolution and the need to be tough, because sometimes the losers aren't going to go away. In the early 90s, I was involved with a lot of people in Oregon fighting the Christian right, who kept bringing up anti-gay initiatives for like 3, 4, 5 years in a row. We would organize to defeat it, and they would come back in another form on the county level or in another town in Oregon in that county, and we'd organize some more and defeat that. But then they would come back the next year with another initiative. And a lot of people were feeling kind of burned out and tired, but at the same time, each victory, we had a broader base of support because of our organizing. We managed to connect Portland organizers with Medford organizers, and it became a statewide mobilizing effort by the time they ran their last campaign, which they finally gave up on once they lost that. So being tough is, our strength is in our numbers. We may get personally tired, but when we realize how many of us are in it, that's where we get our inspiration and resilience.
Absolutely. And you know, and it's not a, what is that saying? It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. But I would say it's not a marathon, it's a relay race where we're constantly recruiting from the sidelines to join in. And that's how we can keep going for a long time and take breaks. Because let's remember the power of rest also in the midst of everything. So I want to share with you these two ways that we can think about power. The first is what we call the power elite model. And you know, when we look at pretty much any institution in our country, in our world, in our community, down the block, any of them, we will find a pretty hierarchical arrangement of power, where we're told the people at the top have the power, and the people at the top act upon the other 7 billion of us through laws, through narratives, through norms, through myths, through institutions. They act upon us and we are acted upon. So that's one analysis of how power operates, and that's accurate. And also at the same time, we also hold an analysis of a people power model. And in our Pajalas community, we are united in believing that everyday people can accomplish extraordinary things together. And what we need in order to do that is a long-term, independent, intergenerational, multiracial, cross-class, mass movement that can win policy change and shift power to transform cultures and systems. So obviously easier said than done, but the key thing here is that we need to win policy change and shift power. And that those two goals together can only be accomplished through organizing. Advocacy organizations that are maybe using reports and lobbying as their only strategies can make a difference, but they do not shift who has power. Organizing is a methodology of shifting power. And so it's about increasing the power of impacted people, increasing so that it becomes impossible for decisions to be made regarding that will impact people without those exact people having a voice in what decisions are made. That's shifting power. So it's not just about winning policy, although that is essential. It's about winning policy in a way that shifts who has power. So our theory of change is around building a mass movement because we believe that it requires that these systems are so big and so interlocking that the only body that will have a chance of changing policy and shifting power and transforming those systems is a mass movement. I was trained that there are two kinds of power: organized money and organized people. And if you don't have organized money, you better get going with organizing people. And ideally we need both, right? Which is why we do fundraising. So to think about like an organizer, we think about power, we think about relationships. In the last workshop, we did some power mapping, and that's one really powerful way to think about relationships. Another way to think about relationships is, who is the person that can say yes to what we want, and how do we influence that person? We have a saying that, some decision makers can see the light and others need to feel the heat. So we have plan A and plan B. And how we bring that heat is also dependent on relationships of trust and relationships of community that we hold with each other so that we can work together to bring the heat. So just one example of that is an action alert that we sent out today as part of Smart Justice Spokane. County Prosecutor Larry Haskell and County Commissioner Al French and other politicians are working to bring a proposal to dissolve the 23-member Law and Justice Council and replace it with just 13, with a new body that would have just 13 positions, all of which are held by white men, and to dissolve and eliminate the Racial Equity Committee as well as all the other committees of the Law and Justice Council, and to replace all of that with just this Community Participation Committee. So we are mobilizing to let the county commissioners and other members of the SRLJC know that we see what's happening. So those who have seen the light and understand that they need to oppose that, know that when they speak out, they are speaking out with community support, and to put as much heat as we're able to on those who are trying to decide what's in their self-interest as elected leaders or as agency heads. Is it in their self-interest to be quiet on this? Is it in their self-interest to support it? Is it in their self-interest to oppose it? So we are mobilizing right now in a way that is about both light and heat. Some are going to see the light and some are going to feel the heat. So I want to spend a minute on another definition. We've talked about organizing as a methodology of shifting power. To me, and there are certain important definitional distinctions between organizer and activist. An activist is someone who themselves is active to take action, to show up. An organizer is somebody who moves others to action as well. So I'm going to turn it back to Ivy to talk more about power.
Awesome. Yeah, just a quick shifting to power. And I know we were front loaded there with information, so we'll do one more activity that I think is pretty fun and then transition into discussion. So of course, this methodology of shifting power, we do it because we believe that injustice is primarily caused by too much power being held by that small group on top of people and institutions who use it to benefit the few at the expense of the many. And these institutions and people maintain and create systems that privilege people, the white people, generally men, those who are wealthy. Liz just went over that. And so just as we move into some more motivating people to act to enable this, I'm gonna put our slide here. Just for a little bit more perspective on that, we want you to raise your virtual hand if you hear something you've done organizing wise. So do some of you or all of you know how to raise your hand on the Zoom? If not, you can unmute as well. Give us some cheer. So participated in a march or rally or town hall or turnout night at City Hall.
Or a vehicle procession during the pandemic.
COVID safe action.
Yeah, quite a few.
Awesome. Recruited other people to be part of an action. If so, who did you recruit? Think about that. And in what methods did you recruit? We'll go through that in a moment. This one's a little different. Maybe helped plan a march or rally or turnout night or some kind of collective action. That's a lot. Planned or aided in a campaign of any sort, political or social. Okay, awesome.
Great.
So for any of these ways you are involved, feel free to drop it in the chat or unmic if you're comfortable. What are some big challenges you see that keep people from being able to win power or win change? So yeah, if you're welcome to unmute or share. Yeah, just give you 1 minute to think about it, because what we're going to talk about next is some really key strategy to overcoming that.
Not to monopolize the conversation, but in my experience, bad data is a killer. Disorganized campaign strategy, lack of organizational structure, breakdown in communication, disunity amongst the constituent groups, being off message, like not really understanding what it is that people are working toward or how to move people.
Yeah.
And you know, kind of failing to meet people where they are in the beginning too.
Yeah, and Laurel dropped in lack of strong communication or planning, and this critical mass of support, Sharon says, could be missing. Lack of strong communication. So y'all must know what we're about to jump into. It's my favorite saying, ahui. So fun.
Ahui!
So fun.
Zara, do you know Ahui?
This is not in my toolbox, but I like it.
Heck
I
yeah.
learned this in the labor movement, so I thought you might have. Anyway, go ahead, Ivy.
Yeah,
I got excited about Ahui.
for sure. So Ahui is the framework developed by Marshall Gans of the United Farm Workers to help organizers understand these elements of motivation. A quote from him, organizers challenge people to act on behalf of their shared values and interests. Ahui stands for anger and agitation, hope, urgency, and it's kind of awkward, funny, but the Y is for you, make a difference. So the A, we hope to ask questions to find out what a person cares about and what they want to change. We work to ask them how they feel about what's going on And do they think it's okay for this problem to continue? And what we're attempting to do here is inspire this righteous indignation, inspire them to feel and make people more angry than they are afraid. Because oftentimes with these big social issues, we talk about, oppressive forces of the system that keep us isolated, that keep us afraid of speaking up. So working to motivate this anger and this righteous indignation to want to help. The H is for hope.
And can
So,
I jump right in on the A just for a minute? And you said this, and I just want to like triple underline it. The most important tool, the most useful tool to tap into anger and agitation is to ask. So you can also think of the A as for asking questions. What percentage of the time do people actually experience being listened to? It's an extremely powerful experience. And also, we walk around. I'll ask you, how many of you know somebody who is just in constant anger and they just fully full of anger, like boiling over all the time? Not that functional sometimes, not really super great to be around. So most of us, in order to get through our days, tamp down that anger pretty severely. We stuff it with by various means. So one of the roles of organizers is to open up space for people to actually feel how it feels to live in the way that they're living. If they're too exhausted when they get home from work, or too damaged from the way that what they're required to do in the workplace, so they can't, lift up their grandkid when they get home, that is pain. That is separation. That's a loss. So how can we ask questions to lift up what's the impact and give people space to feel that? So that's what's really important about the A is it's not about telling people what they should be angry about. It's about asking and giving space and help and providing an opportunity for someone to say it themselves.
Absolutely. And with that anger and frustration and all these amazing emotions you wrestle up, you want to inspire this hope. And so people are going to act when they believe that this change is possible. And we talked about it above, but to inspire hope, we must show people that there is this plan. And you all mentioned that pretty universally. There needs to be a plan to win that is worthwhile for them. The results are going to make a real difference for that person and or the people they care about. It needs to be credible. We need that data, like Zara talked about. The person must believe that the plan is actually going to work, or has worked before, for an example, or is already working to join that movement. And it needs to be clear. People are not going to get involved in a plan if they don't understand it. And so we have a workshop next month on the roles of a campaign, and that will be just another basis to this AHUI. And from there in May, I know this is a long ways out, but I like to plan. If you join us, we'll talk exactly about this. What is the role of an organizer and all these tiered levels? What can they do to inspire hope? Some people's role is to be that listener and ask and join this collective movement, make a community happen. Others is to create that data, collect it, talk to those impacted. Another role of an organizer is to be sharing it, figuring out how to get it out to the masses in an effective and cohesive way. So that is hope. Liz?
And then urgency. The saying from Fred Ross Sr., who has this great book of little axioms for organizers, which you see us post on Instagram fairly regularly, is a good organizer must be able to charge an issue with a supreme sense of urgency. So we use goals and deadlines to create that sense of urgency. Sometimes there is an external deadline, like an election or a city council meeting where a particular vote will happen, or some other, externally existing deadline. If there are no actual deadlines, one powerful way to create urgency is to create them. So we can set our own goals, which means we can be in charge of how reasonable they are, how achievable they are, how sustainable they are, and that's important. We can create deadlines that look toward a final goal of, say, we want 1,000 people to turn out on April 15th to protest against the federal budget's devotion of resources to the military budget, for example. So then we need to back plan from there to say, okay, we need 500 people to be RSVP'd 3 weeks in advance. That means we need to send our first email on this particular date. We need to be getting our flyers out to our partner organizations, etc. So we use urgency. We use natural deadlines or created deadlines to create urgency. And then we have a point of focus that like charges the issue or the task with what we need to do. And then we move into the why, the you can make a difference. And it's important to know with a WHOI that this is actually in order. These 4 things are in order. So after the person has this feeling that is moving them to action, this anger, after they have an understanding of a credible, worthwhile plan to win, and after we have created a sense of urgency, then we challenge them to act. And no matter how small the action is that we're asking them to do, it needs to be 3 things. It needs to be valuable, something that actually makes a meaningful contribution to the plan to win, something that is possible. So we're not asking someone the first time that they've ever done anything to go collect 100 signatures. We might ask them to collect 5 signatures. That's much more doable. So something possible, something that builds confidence to take on more responsibility and a larger action. And third, it must be cooperative, because part of what we're doing here, which I think is what Adrian and Ivy have both mentioned, is we're building our muscle for collective action. So we have to understand how my 5 signatures and your 5 signatures and their 5 signatures and her 5 signatures add up together toward achieving our goal. That's part of the plan to win. So valuable, possible, and cooperative, that's what we're asking people to do, and that's how we're conveying that you can make a difference. The great thing about a WHOI that I have discovered in my experience is that whenever we're coming up against a challenge, 95% of the time, the answer is a WHOI. I've had lots of conversations with, graduates of our Young Activist Leaders program where they might call with a particular challenge, for example, and we talk it out and we realize, oh, a WHOI. Oh, a WHOI. Oh, so I should a WHOI. Oh, so the phone script is a WHOI. Oh, so the fundraising letter is a WHOI. Oh, so what we need to do at this community meeting is a WHOI. It's shocking. But this is the value of this phenomenal work done by Marshall Gans of really boiling down what he learned from architects of the civil rights movement, the architects of the farm workers movement. He really boiled it down to these essential concepts. And really, the answer is just almost always a WHOI. And then, there's work to do to unpack what that means in the specifics. But this framework is one of the best tools to have in your pocket. It might be like, oh, I have to testify at city council. How do I organize what I have to say? Oh, a WHOI.
So fun, and it's fun to say, so.
It is fun to say, there's that.
Oh, very good. Yes, so I do have one more question for you all, but Liz already said it, just to make it very clear. No matter how small the action, it needs to be valuable, possible, and cooperative. Those are the big 3. And we are coming right up on 8-ish, 8:15 here. So we can just end with, could you think of a time when you used part of or all of a WHOI and the methodology subconsciously or intentionally to move someone else to act? Or is there a time when someone may have attempted to motivate you to act using these steps? Liz just said it's can be the answer to everything. And I think that's something as I reflect, heck yeah. She's used it on me a bunch of times. I use it without knowing it. Yeah, so feel free to share if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd love to hear examples.
Well, I would say just real quickly, you were mentioning about talking about art in your breakout group. That's the role artists can play with the youth, challenging people, inspiring people, through their artwork to keep the faith and stay engaged. Art helps people realize what they don't yet fully understand, but it helps them feel it.
Mm-hmm. The other day I was trying to get up to Mount Spokane. I said, Dad, you know what? My homework is all done. I know you're going to be upset if I'm not home early. So if you let me leave now, maybe I'll go out, hit some good tricks, inspiring the hope. The snow is almost gone this season. It's urgent. I need to get up there, and you are the one who can give me the keys to the car, Dad. So that's my example for the week.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, I used to know an organizer who the example she would give in trainings about a hui was how to get someone to go see a movie with you when the movie that you previously picked was really bad. She had a whole thing. I do want to make the point that, like, as Ivy alluded to earlier, these tools can be used, Elizabeth, what's her name? Elizabeth Gilbert, who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, has this saying that power is like tofu. It's a neutral energy source. It's what you do with it that gives it flavor. And these tools are the same way. I sometimes wish there was a code of ethics for organizers, like there are in other professions. These tools can be used in manipulative ways. And that is not why we are teaching them to you. So don't do that. Not that any of you would, but I just want to really emphasize that this is not about getting people to do things for you. This is not about getting people to do things in a way that feeds our egos. This is about building a movement. This is about mutual interest. And this is about, like, we're moving from truth to the best of our knowledge, to the best of our seeing it, and being honest about our own needs to grow and our own collective need to work together to build the world that we want to live in. So with all of our joking about, going to see a movie or whatever it may be, like, this is how we can communicate in effective and truthful ways to the best of our ability of understanding the truth.
Yes. So just a very quick summary. I have a little list I wanted to make sure to reinforce here. And you're welcome to stay for discussion after. We'll be here and have time for any of your questions, or if you have, these challenges you'd like to pose. It's a room full of organizers here now, recently skilled organizers, full toolboxes. So this asking these agitational questions is powerful. I just wanted to mention that. We talked about it in a hui. We talked about it at the beginning. Why do we motivate people to act? Hope comes from this plan to win that is valuable, clear, and credible. We motivate that hope. The tasks we give to create these social movements need to be achievable, they need to be valuable, and they need to be collective. So just like Liz said, scalable, learning your people and learning the why. And putting time and thought into planning makes us better to be able to explain how they're credible and clear. So the more we're able to recruit folks and strengthen our campaigns or movements, the more we're able to win. And that would be all I have for you, Liz. You might have some parting words as well, but thank you so much, all. Mana hobu.
I think my parting word is ahui.
And perspective, that too.
And perspective.
Ahui.
So thanks for joining us, everybody. We are done with the presentation. If you want to stay longer to chat or share a particular challenge that you're facing, you're very, very welcome to do that. We like to put our heads together and brainstorm, with whatever of the many, many possible challenges is the one that is facing you at this point. If we can be helpful in brainstorming around that, we're happy to do it. Or if you just feel like chatting, you're welcome to stay.